Yeah. One of the breakout decks last time we were playing Standard here on the SCG Tour, the Super Friends deck does a pretty good job of pound-for-pound fighting. It's kind of that mid-range you were talking about.
Yeah, and this is one of the decks that we were talking about Abe Corrigan before. This is one of the things that he got a top 8 with when we were in Syracuse last season.
Now, Christiansen for the first game is on a mulligan to 5.
It looks like he has his Colors of Mana as well as a Mox Amber, though, so he's likely going to get to play some Magic, and it's not like Simic Nexus is exactly kicking your teeth down your throat in the early turns.
End step opt here from Dylan. Thomas's opening hand, you mentioned that Mox Amber, Teferi Time Raveler, Lightning Strike. His deck is 22 Planeswalkers, 14 spells. Most of the spells are red removal. I think interaction-wise, the card we're looking at here is Dovin's Veto as a 2-of in the main for Thomas Christiansen.
And something that I like that Christiansen did here is he had the option to lead on either Sacred Foundry or Hallowed Fountain, and he led on the Sacred Foundry, which could actually trick Dylan into drawing something like a Root Snare, thinking it would be good against an aggro deck, even though it's pretty weak against the Planeswalkers deck.
And Dylan with a couple ops certainly does have to make that call to try to figure out what his opponent is on. He has converted a Growth Spiral early on and looks like he's going for a second one. In a matchup like this, seems like it'd be your best card.
Yeah, that's just kind of so the games that Simic Nexus has a turn 2 Growth Spiral versus the games that it doesn't just kind of feel like night and day. Ultimately, the Simic Nexus deck is a deck that just wants a ton of mana, and it gets you there.
Yeah, it allows you to skip an entire turn. Christiansen with Teferi Time Raveler, but he's already looking at 5, make that 6 mana from his opponent.
Right, and Dylan had a Wilderness Reclamation in his hand that he chose not to cast, and I really like this show of patience on his side.
All right, so what's the risk of casting a Wilderness Reclamation this early, especially when your opponent's tapped out?
A lot of it's that you don't really want to expose it to the Teferi Time Raveler. You would rather Christiansen just minus this Teferi for no value at all.
Mox Amber for Thomas is his 4th mana source. He didn't have a land that turn, but the Mox Amber doing a good land impression. Dylan already on 7 mana. But he actually doesn't have any payoff, and it is Thomas drawing cards. It's one of the first cards we're seeing here from M20. It is drawn from Dreams. The 4-mana sorcery is Dig Through Time without the Delve. Just 4 mana, you top 7 cards. You get to select 2 of them to put in your hand, and the rest go on the bottom.
Teferi on 3, roll up into that on 4 just is so strong. That's so much card selection and instant speed.
So I like all this mana that Dylan has, but usually in this situation, I would want to see something like Chemister's Insight, search for Azcanta, some way to convert this into meaningful value.
This is cute. So we saw a float of a mana from a Mox Amber and then bouncing it with Teferi to recast it in order to actually turn Teferi's minus into gain mana, draw a card.
And that's exactly what he does. Casts his second copy of Drawn from Dreams. He's playing 2 in the main. And he mentioned he was on a mulligan to 5. This will build him right back up to that starting hand size.
Right, and the attractive thing about this in the line that he's taking here is it digs him to those Dovin's Vetoes we talked about before. The advantage the Simic Nexus deck has sometimes is that it blinks a lot of the cards that a lot of decks are playing by not playing creatures. You get a sort of virtual card advantage, and only a couple of things truly matter. But Christiansen, if he can find those Vetoes, that's going to be fairly backbreaking for hand.
You're talking about cards not mattering. There was a Lightning Strike in the opener for Thomas. It's difficult for him to convert that. But Dylan just not cast anything here, and while it looked great for him with double Growth Spiral in the early game, I think there's cause for concern at this point.
Yeah, and it looks like Dylan just kind of has those Root Snares and a bunch of lands. He may have left one of those Root Snares on top earlier as a result of that tapped Sacred Foundry from Christiansen. Oh, this was a big draw. It looks like hand picked up a copy of Search for Azcanta, and even though Teferi's going to get to bounce it, this does give hand a way to hopefully start getting closer to snowballing some sort of advantage.
So when you're playing Simic Nexus against a Jeskai Super Friends deck, how many counter spells do you anticipate them having, at least in Game 1?
Game 1, the biggest one that I'm looking to play around is just the card Spell Pierce. That's something that Team Lotus Box had in their list when they did so well with it at SCG Syracuse a few months ago. Other than that, I might be thinking 1 or 2 Dovin's Veto. Otherwise, I'm not really playing around that much counter magic. And your deck is so linear, you kind of just have to make them have it a lot of the time.
So a Root Snare from Dylan, just to get cards in the graveyard, it looks like. And then Dovin's Veto hits his Wilderness Reclamation.
Oh, this is some great sequencing on Dylan's part. So Dylan doesn't actually have a bounce spell that can answer this Teferi, and so he used that Wilderness Reclamation as bait to pave the way for Search for Azcanta here.
And then Search for Azcanta resolves. Now Shock going to go upstairs. 2 damage to Dylan. Thomas also gets a servo off the Saheeli he cast.
Right, and we also saw Dylan cast a sorcery speed root snare since he can't ever convert them for life with this Teferi on the battlefield, just to put it closer to actually having 7 cards for Search for Azcanta in the graveyard to just immediately transform it.
So why was it important for him to sorcery speed that root snare?
It's because the Teferi is turning it off during Christiansen's turn.
Back over to Thomas we go. It is a 3rd Planeswalker. It's Narset Parter of Veils. And this Jeskai Super Friends deck was slow out of the gates, but now has established its board. 3 Planeswalkers, 3 servos. You see a 4th Planeswalker in Karn Sign of Urza added to the hand.
Yeah, and this is one of the bigger draws to this deck is it's actually quite good at turning the corner, just on the back of the fact that so many of the advantage that these Planeswalkers are able to snowball is in the form of creatures.
Yeah, I've seen attack from the servos. Maybe those root snares are going to come in handy on Dylan's side. Takes 2, goes to 16. Another Wilderness Reclamation, the draw for Dylan. Now, he's already seen a Dovin's Veto here in Game 1. You had mentioned you expect 0 to 2 Dovin's Vetoes out of your opponent in the first game.
Right, and at this point, I believe the door is close enough to closed for Dylan that he just kind of has to start jamming a lot of the time.
Interesting. Wilderness Reclamation for Dylan. Untaps, going to his end step, and it looks like says go. He didn't make Search for Azcanta here.
No, and his reasoning here is he may just be trying to protect it from something.
End step Lightning Strike. Dylan drops to 13, a 4th servo. A Sark on the Masterless, if it shows up, would force Dylan to start root snaring here.
Yeah, unfortunately he can't do that with Teferi Time Raveler in play.
So that would just get him.
Correct, yeah, the game would just end on the spot.
And how about that? There's Sarkhan, turns creatures into dragons, and despite the mulligan to 5, it is Thomas Christiansen ending up with the win here in game number 1.
Right, and that's just the power of these Jeskai Super Friends decks, is if you get to untap with a Planeswalker more than once or twice, you're just going to be so far ahead because of the advantage that they snowball.
Yeah, Dylan, I mean, it feels to me like what happened on his Simic Nexus hand there is he had 2 Growth Spirals and some lands in his opener. So the hand, and maybe an Opt. Certainly a hand you can't throw back. I mean, it has Growth Spiral in it to start.
Absolutely.
But there is a risk that that can happen in a game, and Dylan finds himself down 1-0. So we look over toward the sideboards for each player. We'll start with Dylan Hand, Simic Nexus. In the main deck, his only actual win condition, outside of looping Nexus of Fate, which is the real win condition, the only way to deal damage is his 1 Callous Dismissal. Now in the sideboard, he can mix things up. We see Shifting Ceratok, Carnage Tyrant, Biogenic Ooze, and Thrashing Brontodon all as creatures. How many, if of these, do you think come in the sideboard games against Jeskai?
So you're very interested in the big creatures. That's to say the Carnage Tyrant, the Biogenic Ooze, and the other dinosaurs are things that you're pretty interested in playing. Thrashing Brontodon is a little underwhelming if you don't know whether or not Christiansen has anything to the effect of Ixalan's binding. But otherwise, just things that let you diversify your threats are so powerful. And the Ceratops in particular is something that's so good at killing Teferi and Narset that you're pretty priced into bringing those cards in.
For you joining us here on the SCG Tour this weekend, now in Season 2, the SCG Tour is brought to you by Carnox. You can see them. Thank you for the beautiful chairs in the feature match area. We've got your back. You can get the gaming chairs here, and you can get an extra 10% off at checkout using the SCG code, so carnox.com/SCG. So, some mix up there for Dylan. The cards that come out for these, Root Snares, I'd assume?
Root Snare's incredibly underwhelming here. The other thing that you could end up looking into shaving on some number of copies of are likely your Growth Spirals if you're expecting the games to go longer anyway.
Okay.
If you're just trying to lean into a kind of longer game rather than trying to just turbo your opponent out when that's going to be more difficult in the face of Teferi, Narset, etc., then you may just look into something like Negate instead to have in your 2-drop slot. But for the most part, you're just trying to shave on cards like Root Snare, since that card's pretty embarrassing against Teferi Time Raveler.
Now, out of the sideboard for Thomas, he gets to sideboard in the 3rd and 4th copies of Dove and Veto, which seems excellent.
Correct.
Other options he has. A big Teferi, he can board in a 3rd copy of Drawn from Dreams if he expects this to go late. Is there really anything else you like here other than the vetoes?
The other thing that is fairly attractive is Aether Gust. So Aether Gust is something that can actually sort of counter, at least temporarily, a Carnage Tyrant as it's about to come down on the battlefield, as well as Shifting Ceratops, just because it doesn't actually counter any of those. It's just going to go back on the top of Dylan's library, but whenever you're playing these Planeswalker decks, the name of the game is basically just time and whether or not you get to untap with your Planeswalkers. So having that sort of tool available is great. It's also very good against the card Wilderness Reclamation.
So Aether Gust, one of our new spells here from Magic 2020, puts a red or green spell or permanent on the top or bottom of its controller's library. Now, the caster of the red or green spell gets to pick where it goes. You mentioned it's a temporary answer for something like Carnage Tyrant.
Correct.
Both players on 7 is Temple of Mystery to start for Dylan. That just seems like a natural fit for Simic Nexus.
Oh yeah, you aren't really trying to go that fast. You want card selection. You're a linear deck. It is match made in heaven. What's your favorite art in Temple of Mystery?
I think I like the Theros art more on these two.
Yeah, it's tough. I really like the dual deck artwork on it. I wish it came non-foil.
Oh. On a lot of cards I don't always play. You know, I know some people always like the original art on their cards. I actually frequently like new arts.
Mm-hmm. The new Temple of Epiphany is gorgeous.
That one's great. I agree. Chemister's Insight, the first play of the game here from Dylan.
Christiansen having a really slow start out the gates, which is going to favor the Nexus deck a good chunk of the time, because the Super Friends deck, really, every turn that it isn't untapping with a Planeswalker is going to feel like a win for Dylan.
Right. That's why I think last game was so surprising, because the game didn't really have any action until Dylan was on 7 lands. That's where he wants to be most of the time. Now, he didn't have the right cards to end it from there.
Right, and the big thing to look at there is how long Christiansen had a Teferi Time Raveler on the battlefield. That's what bought so much time for Christiansen in a way that was favorable.
A draw spell of his own from Christiansen. It is Drawn from Dreams.
Inspired by that Chemister's Insight, really.
Now, interestingly, Simic Nexus could be playing Drawn from Dreams, but has stuck with Chemister's Insight.
Right, and the big reason for that is that Chemister's Insight plays so well with Wilderness Reclamation. You just play Reclamation on 4, get to untap your lands, and then on the 4 mana, you get to use it on a Chemister's Insight.
Right. Reclamation really puts a premium on you playing instant speed cards.
Right.
Thomas finds the lands. He does, because he was on the draw here with that Drawn from Dreams, he's going to have to discard to hand size. So in response, Dylan casts a Chemister's Insight. We see Chandra, Acolyte of Flame, the discard from Thomas. One of his 2 copies. Let's meet the 3-mana Chandra from Magic 2020.
Mm-hmm. And that card even does a little nice Snapcaster impression with cards like the Lightning Strike that we saw in Game 1. So it being able to apply pressure as well as get a little bit of value makes this a natural home for that card.
Now here's out of the sideboard one of those large creature threats from Dylan. It is Carnage Tyrant.
Oh, Carney
yeah. Now, Thomas does have Aether Gust in his deck, but he didn't have one when that was cast here. So
he will not be Aether Gusting it now.
Right. Once it's on the battlefield, there's not much he can do to clean it up.
Ooh, here is a natural hate card against the Simic Nexus deck.
Yeah, this is one of the 2 copies of Chandra Awakened Inferno. 6 mana, the Mythic Chandra from Magic 2020. First, its ability is it gives your opponent an emblem that deals 1 damage to them on their upkeep, and can give them multiple copies of this emblem.
Now, I'm not one to give advice to players as an impartial arbiter of tournament results, but If I were near Dylan, I would recommend he took less than 18 turns from here.
Oh, wow, wait, we're talking about Nexus of Fate, aren't we?
Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
This is
card
real.
Is actually, like, it's funny. It's a good proactive card, right? It is just a strong planeswalker.
Yeah.
But also...
He can't just loop turns now.
Right. He can take a few with Carnage Tyrant, though.
Right, and that's what he'll do. He'll attack in for 7. It looks like ignoring the Chandra, he's going straight upstairs with the damage.
Right, there's a point where if you just find another copy of Nexus of Fate, the game literally ends.
Yeah, Thomas should be down to 11 on the hit.
And here, even if you don't find the other Nexus, then you can go after Chandra if you really want to.
Right, yeah, Thomas down to 11 on the first hit. Dylan cast Nexus of Fate. One more Nexus will do it. Carnage Tyrant attacks. Thomas down to 4.
Upstairs.
Don't think he has it rolled up just yet.
No, but he does have a Callous Dismissal in his hand, which can do some good work to this Chandra as far as just sort of time-walking Thomas.
That's going to be the play. Callous Dismissal puts a non-land permanent on top of its owner's library. Or back in their hand, rather. Apologies. But it does amass 1.
Cedric Phillips to the feature match area, please.
First one with the new personality tokens. It's one of our first amass cards here on camera. And Thomas picks him up. Dylan finding that window for Carnage Tyrant ends up being the story. Once it's on the battlefield, there's not much Thomas can do.
You know, bright side, he did get to cast a Chandra and
give an emblem. Yeah. So we go to a third game. You can see that look on Thomas's face. Okay, Carnage Tyrant. He has reached for the sideboard immediately.
And we see Dylan also staring at his copies of Aether Gust here after seeing a little Chandra going to the graveyard.
Yeah.
And then a big Chandra hitting the battlefield. And that Chandra can't be countered. So Aether Gust is one of the only real answers that you have to that. So he's likely just trying to think to himself, all right, well, what kind of plan do I actually have for this card?
Well, that's the interesting thing, right? You look at these Aether Gusts, and it looks like they're going to be live. You'll find targets of them if you sideboard them in. I think the question Dylan now has to ask is that his role in this matchup? To be answering his opponent's Planeswalkers? Does he want a reactive card like that?
Right, and the thing is whenever you're playing a combo deck, there's sort of a point where when your opponent is playing hate cards, you have to bring in answers for the answers in order to pull off your combo. And we joked about it before, but Chandra is kind of a backdoor hate card against the Simic Nexus deck because it does actually put a cap on how many turns you can take.
Yeah, if Dylan didn't have Carnage Tyrant on the battlefield already, that would have been a pretty difficult situation.
Exactly. And Dylan doesn't have a huge transformational sideboard, right?
Yeah.
Christiansen doesn't know, but we know that Dylan only has 4 other threats if he's not bringing in these Thrashing Bronodons.
And the negates in his sideboard don't work here because Chandra cannot be countered.
Right, exactly.
Dylan going to contemplate this one of Team BCW, the Simic Nexus player here from Massachusetts. This is his hometown open. Last year on the tour, with 20 opens, 5 top 8s, 1 in 4 conversion there. Some very strong stats. You see why he was picked up by Team BCW.
Oh yeah, he's just big on Simic Nexus, an incredible Modern Humans pileup giving him most of those top 8s. It's really unsurprising to see him making a name for himself here on the tour.
Still looking for that first trophy. A week 1 standard has got to be one of his better chances at it.
Yeah, and this is a weekend where Nexus is well positioned. He just is a Nexus guy. Mm-hmm. This can be his weekend. He's 1 game away from locking up his first round here.
So with Nexus being good this weekend, or the thought is that it's going to be good this weekend, if there are mid-range matchups like Jeskai, that's what you're looking for on Dylan's side?
Right, you're mostly looking for the actual true control decks of the format. Think Esper Control, for example, without
Sure.
Hero of Precinct 1. You're looking for the Elementals deck, that's pretty favorable. And then any of the green creature decks in general. There are some new dinosaurs running around on the back of some cards out of Core 2020. Those are the matchups that you're really hoping are great, because there, your Root Snares actually have power, and that card just feels like 2-mana Time Walk against those decks. And 2-mana Time Walk is just Time Walk.
Yeah, that is actually what Time Walk costs.
That is actual Time Walk.
Be interesting to see where the metagame falls this weekend. I think the deck he may be most worried about is some players have been talking about mono blue having a resurgence this weekend.
Right, that's one of the matchups you really want to dodge. Mono red, mono blue, these low to the ground aggressive decks that are either very disruptive or not set back very hard by the card Root Snare are the things that Simic is just going to struggle against a good bit.
And we have our third game here. Thomas Christiansen's deck, the Jeskai Super Friends deck. We have caught some glimpses of how Magic 2020 has changed the deck list, in that he has these Chandras, both rare and mythic from the set, and Drawn from Dreams seems to be the major addition. And I'm looking at Thomas's hand here, once he puts it back. I was a bit surprised to see Lightning Strike still on the list here for Game 3.
Yeah, it may just be that he didn't feel like he had that many cards to bring in, or it's just a great way to kind of clock Dylan. Especially with Christiansen on the play here, that card is worth 6 damage on its own if you have a Chandra.
Now Dylan takes a mulligan as well.
And both players there just didn't really have any kind of curve. Christiansen only had 2 lands and a Dovin's Veto, which sounds great. And then a bunch of 4-drops. And
right.
There's a chance if you just miss on a land or two, you're just so far out of it that this one Dovin's Veto isn't going to save you. And then on Dylan's side, he had 3 Tamios, 3 lands, and a Nexus. And if we were to see Christiansen even just play, say, a Saheeli or a Chandra on turn 3, that hand's not going to do anything.
That hand's really difficult on Dylan's side because the ceiling on it is really low. It seems like there's very few ways you can draw to make the hand good with 3 lands, 3 Tameo. I mean, okay, you want the 4th land, and if you hit it, you play land go until turn 4, which could very easily lose.
Yeah, you want lands and spells, which normally sounds like a good thing, but the problem is that he needs lands and spells with that hand.
On 6, Dylan has 2 lands, Ceratok, Callous Dismissal, Wilderness Reclamation, and Nexus of Fate.
All right, and we see both players looking at the London mulligan here, drawing back up to 7 each hand, and then if they choose to keep, they get to put some on the bottom.
And that's what Dylan has done, but Thomas going to 5.
Well, that didn't seem to stop him too much game 1.
No, and that's something I like about the Jeskai Super Friends deck, is that it doesn't need that many resources to get going. 3 lands and a Teferi is a fine hand. For Dylan's side, he needs more material. He needs enough land to get him to 4, 5, 6 land drops. He needs some big payoff cards.
Exactly. The Simic Nexus deck is just a very resource-heavy deck where you need a ton of pieces to go off. But the Jeskai Super Friends deck kind of just needs lands to cast a Planeswalker and then hope that Planeswalker can snowball an advantage when a deck like Simic Nexus that can't pressure these Planeswalkers comes up.
Christiansen keeping on 5. London mulligan here means he sends 2 cards back to the bottom of the deck. And on the play here for Game 3. We'll start with Hallowed Fountain. The first check we'll see whether players have land drops.
There's 1 shifting Ceratops in Dylan's hand.
If he can get there, that would be quite the play. Looks like 2 lands. Debating if he wants to go for Search for Azcanta. Dovin's Veto mana is available on Thomas's side.
I would happily introduce my opponent to the difference between jelly and jam in this scenario.
Well, one has chunks of fruit.
Well, you can't jelly a search for Azcanta onto the battlefield.
Ah, I see.
See, look. Fresh jam on a Saturday morning. Nothing like it.
Thomas Scry, he made a Teferi Time Raveler. It's gonna marmalade that search back to Dylan's hand.
How dare you?
Marmalade is just a type of jam.
Oh,
Well,
yeah,
technically it has peel in it. That's the difference. It's not
Okay.
just chunks of fruit, it's also peel.
yeah, whatever you say.
Well, Dylan might need some peel here because there's 2 planeswalkers.
Yeah, he's gonna need to peel something.
Narset finds card Sign of Urza for Thomas.
This game is bananas.
Ooh.
Bananas.
I don't like banana jam. I don't think that's a good thing for Dylan.
Isn't that what they say in that song, Black Betty? All right, here's the shifting Ceratops to answer the Narset on Christiansen's side.
All right, so shifting Ceratops, a good card here, especially something that can attack to take down these planeswalkers is what Dylan's looking for. The 5/4 from M20 can't be countered, has protection from blue, so it can't be bounced with Teferi, can't be countered, and it also can gain your choice of Reach, Trample, or Haste if you have an extra mana.
Let's see, it can kill Baby Teferi. All right,
Great.
hold on, I'm counting these. It can kill Narset.
Great.
And it can kill that big Teferi. Wow, what
That's a good
great
card in the
card.
matchup,
Jeez,
yeah.
This is an efficient piece of machinery.
Teferi will plus. Yeah, looking at ways for Thomas to answer this.
Lyra,
Lyra out of the sideboard.
Karn token can block it.
6 mana Chandra.
6 mana. Ooh.
Okay. And Karn Scion of Urza pluses and shows an option between Lyra and Saheeli. Well, Dylan will give Thomas the Saheeli because Lyra's excellent on this board.
Yeah, and both of those cards kind of represent a way to sort of deal with this Ceratops. You can at least put bodies in front of it.
Yeah, now Ceratops only attacks for 5, so he can't stop Thomas from getting this Lyra if Thomas really wants it.
Yeah, that's kind of the big problem here. And knowing that Christiansen also has a copy of Teferi, Hero of Dominaria in hand, is not helping things.
Ceratops attacks. Dylan decides to take care of Teferi with the dinosaur.
Yeah, even if it feels like this is a little bit less valuable because it means that you're not going to get to actually take 5 loyalty off of something, just getting a planeswalker off the battlefield has a ton of value.
It does mean when he casts this Wilderness Reclamation, he can untap it, and because the Teferi is gone, he can use this mana now.
Exactly.
Four cards still in hand for Dylan.
He also could even end up getting fancy with this Blast Zone.
7th loyalty for Karn shows a pair of lands. Temple and Interplanar Beacon. Thomas will get the Temple.
Here, Dylan effectively viewing that Scry being less valuable than having an additional mana this turn.
In hand, Aether Gust, Dovin's Veto, Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Great cards. Ceratops is proving to be tricky, though. So we'll start with Saheeli. Remember, one of the abilities that Ceratops can get is Trample, so a servo blocker only goes so far on this board. Back to Dylan we go.
Counters on Blast Zone. It's gonna blow.
Up to 3. We'll take care of the 2 of the Planeswalkers.
Right.
And we see one in a copy of Veil of Summer. New card from Magic 2020 in Dylan's hand.
card's quite nice against counter spells.
Now, spells can't be countered. Your cards gain hexproof from black and blue.
Yeah. It's actually one of the ways to get around a Dovin's veto.
And Dovin's veto can't be countered by spells that counter it. It can be countered by the rules or by protection, so you can get around Dovin's veto. Ceratops attacks. Karn drops down to 2 loyalty.
Standard open competitors, that is time in round 1.
The 6th land here for Dylan. He's going to go to work.
And then proceed to 5 additional
Oh, if he taps too low for this Veil of Summer, he'll get blown out by an Aether Gust here on this Wilderness Reclamation.
He's going to go for another shifting Ceratops. Thomas could Veil of Summer here. Or rather, Aether Gust, the other hate card. And he's going to Aether Gust the Wilderness Reclamation and let the Ceratops resolve.
Right.
So Wilderness Reclamation on top of Dylan's deck. And yeah, you mentioned there's only 2 green sources. Dylan spent them both, so his Veil of Summer not going to be able to be cast here. And Dylan chooses to put Wilderness on the bottom of his deck, not top.
Okay. Oh, and this is nice. Since Christiansen had to do that inside of Hand's second main phase, Hand now gets to cast this Search for Azcanta knowing the shields are down. Not anywhere close to transforming it, but...
Back to Thomas we go. He decides the best way out of this is just Lyra Dawnbringer. He Karn -1, puts the Angel back in his hand, and now he will cast it. With Dovin's Veto and Aether Gust mana up, this Lyra looking to go the distance.
Yeah, this is a lot.
Dylan says no to Growth Spiral. Draws Carnage Tyrant.
Also a lot.
Not bad here, but I believe Thomas does have a second Aether Gust.
Yeah, that would be so brutal to have the Carnage Tyrant get Aether Gusted as well. And it looks like Hand has a copy of Callous Dismissal that he's thinking about using on this Lyra here to try and mop up the battlefield a little bit.
Some interactions here with the Aether Gust. Veil of Summer reads, spells you control can't be countered this turn. And you and permanents you control gain hexproof from blue and black, but that doesn't interact with Aether Gust. That doesn't counterspell it, puts it on top of the library. So you can't use Veil of Summer to push a card through an Aether Gust.
Right, so you couldn't push a green card through it, but if you were to cast this Callous Dismissal, Aether Gust isn't going to be good enough.
Right.
players in the 11 a.m. standard challenge. Your event is ready to begin by table 360.
Dylan goes, looks like he's going for Carnage Tyrant on 6 mana. This is a pretty big check on the Aether Gust.
Oof. All right, you have it or you don't.
And Thomas has it. Dylan wants the card again. He puts it back on top for next turn.
Yep.
See whether or not a servo was made there. Saw a hand wave by Thomas. Looks like no servo. A plus from Karn shows Lightning Strike and a land. Now, it looks like Lyra's around to stay, but because of these Ceratops, if Thomas starts attacking with the Lyra, he is going to lose most of his Planeswalkers.
Right, and Hand does still have that Callous Dismissal hanging out in his hand.
Now, as you mentioned, the turnaround speed of Jeskai. Here's Sarkhan the Masterless. Pluses to make the Planeswalkers into dragons, and they all attack. This is a 17 damage coming across. Dylan down to 3, and his next draw is not going to help him. He knows it's Carnage Tyrant, so he may have to just bin it with Search for Azcanta.
Yeah, so here he's looking at a spot where he's going to have to Callous Dismissal Lyra and then send both Ceratops at Sarkhan.
Yeah, but there's a problem here, and the problem is that Dylan's at 3, and Lightning Strike was one of those cards under Karn.
Right. This is such an incredible squeeze here.
Where he has to answer Sarkhan, he has to answer Lyra, and he has to answer Lightning Strike, and he has to do it all this turn.
Wow.
See, head and hands, that is a lot to ask of one turn cycle. I'm not sure he has it.
Yeah, no, this is unbelievable.
The closing speed of Sarkhan in the Jeskai deck is so impressive.
Yeah, your best bet here might just be to bounce the Lyra and hope that Thomas tries to interact. You can trip off of the Veil of Summer and then maybe draw something?
Attacks down the Sarkhan was the first play. Both Ceratops swung in. He has to answer that Lyra, you're right. That's lethal. So here is Callous Dismissal. Thomas has Dovin's Veto, but he'll allow it for right now.
Yeah, he knows that that's just not the thing you need to fight over when you have a lightning strike.
And Thomas says he does have Sarkhan and Dovin's Veto. He's going to cast Sarkhan and then Veto to counter whatever spell Dylan has. And Dylan extends the hand, cannot answer it, and it is Thomas Christiansen with Jeskai Super Friends picking up the win, winning twice on a multi-5 in the matchup.
Yeah, I mean, that's just kind of the power of this Super Friends deck, especially when the Simic deck doesn't have any way to pressure Super Friends.
So round one goes to Thomas Christiansen. So Jeskai Super Friends was the winner of our